Right, so you have in front of you these clarifying ruling desires. We passed that out last week. I'm sure you've had a week to digest it. Some of you may have said, oops. So hence another copy is in front of you. Now we're going to walk through these examples instead of just blazing through them in rapid fire fashion. So I think each example, now keep in mind these examples, the heart is so complex and there are multiple desires that can rule us at the same time. So while we have sought to identify one particular example of one particular ruling desire, this ruling desire, or this the example, the biblical examples, could actually spill into other ruling desires too. So let's walk through each one of these, see if this thing works for me. Okay. Now that's interesting. Now, because it's upside down. I was almost ready to call. I'm sure she's had that call. It just seems to me that the click should, anyway. Technology. Okay, man, oh man. Okay, all right, we got that out of the way. All right, so let's look at these examples one by one for perfection. The desire to control others, surroundings, or outcomes. And so you may see either the control of others or surroundings, outcomes, or even two of the three in each of these examples. So let's turn to each one of these. Judges 6, and most of these are familiar to you, but perhaps we've not paused long enough to look at the desire behind the action, the desire behind the thought or the words that come out of the mouths of these biblical figures. So Judges chapter 6. Judges chapter 6, 36 through 40. And very familiar for Gideon's part of this narrative that he is testing the Lord, right? It's the fleece situation. It's, let's put this out and, well, let's read the text here. Someone read 36 through 40. Let's read from the ESV if someone has that, 36 through 40. Someone read that for me. Steve's looking around, must be ready to roll on it.
Okay. Then Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, behold, I am laying a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece alone, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said." And it was so. When you rose early next morning and squeezed the fleece, and wrung enough dew from the fleece to fill a bowl with water. Then Gideon said to God, "Let not your anger burn against me. Let me speak just once more. Please let me test just once more with the fleece. Please let it be dry on the fleece only, and on the ground let there be dew." And God did so that night, and it was dry on the fleece only, and on all the ground there was dew.
Isn't it so interesting how Gideon phrases his words? In verse 36, he acknowledges the promise of God and what God's going to do, right? As you have said. He's even acknowledging what God's already said. What do we call that when God starts with a P? He makes a promise here, right? So God, fish. Okay, so God makes a promise, and Gideon is even acknowledging that promise. God, you've made a promise. However, I mean, oh my goodness. And so, verse 37, here's that first, do this. And as you have said, now that's interesting, 36 and 37 conclude with the same words, right? The same, back to the promise, as you said. Wow. And then verse 38, God does, and then verse 39. How does Gideon word his phrase? Be angry, like he already knows this isn't right, and then what's next after anger? What's he gonna say about test? Do you have the word test in there somewhere? I mean, he's testing. What do you know about testing God? His probably not a good thing to do, right? I hope you're not doing that. Like putting God in the science lab, All right, God, we're going to test you. But just once more. Oh, my goodness. So, all this to say, can you see how this is Gideon seeking to control what? Of the three here. Well, certainly control God, outcome, right? So we could put he's seeking to control God. I mean, like, how futile and foolish is that? And yet here is God allows this narrative. I mean, you do realize that there are a gazillion, I don't know if that's an official word, but there are a gazillion narratives and events that are never recorded in Scripture that God was part of and did, and yet he allows this one to be recorded. And just the folly of man, and yet God even meets us in our folly. So here is Gideon stepping over the line and seeking to control a situation, even though God's already promised this is going to happen. I'm going to save Israel. All right, now the beloved Delilah. Judges 16. Judges chapter 16. Now, this is not a support for men having long hair. That if you have long hair, you're going to be strong. Oh, by the way, so what did someone say? So, and Pastor Marv is exempt from this. I don't mean the long hair, but Pastor, from answering this, because I'm sure he has the answer. What if a young person came to you and said, I'm going to grow my hair long because Samson did it, and it seemed to be pleasing to the Lord, and he had strength, and God used him, and so, besides, I see pictures of Jesus, and he seemed to have long hair. So how would you respond to that? See, you thought you were coming from Ruling Desires. But actually, we're going to get behind that what to the why. Anyway, so this young man comes to you, and he says, hey, I want to grow my hair long because, hey, it's biblical. There are people in Scripture had long hair, so let's do it. How do you respond to him?
You have to take a Nazarite vow.
Oh, that's good. There's context going on here. All right, we're going to do that, and then when it's all done, we'll cut your locks. Okay. All right, there's a good observation. But what about Jesus' long hair?
There's cultural context.
Who said that? Oh, okay. Cultural context.
Yeah. There's an idea, like there's a standard within culture of femininity and masculinity, and there's a rebellious.
And support for that would be in 1 Corinthians chapter, and I know you're all running there, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, right? So you know what that says? How about we go over there for a moment? 1 Corinthians chapter 11. And now I know I'm going to open up a box that I should never have. But 1 Corinthians chapter 11. But, just let's think. And so, and it has to do with head coverings. Oh, yeah. So, if you're familiar with 1 Corinthians chapter 11, it's right before, well, what do you know about 1 Corinthians? It's a book of abuses, right? I mean, here are the Corinthians, and anything and everything that could go wrong goes wrong, or they could do wrong, they did wrong. And so in 1 Corinthians 11, here's this scenario of verse 15. We're going to drop down there. Verse 14. We will ignore head coverings for now. Verse 14, does not even nature itself teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a dishonor to him? That's pretty strong, pretty straightforward. But if a woman has long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given to her for a covering. But if anyone seems to be contentious, we have no such custom, nor do the churches of God. Now, I'm not wanting to exposit this passage as much as I am saying that scenarios come to you all the time. But don't get caught up in the weeds of the scenario. Let's get to why this is even a concern for this young man to want to have long hair. See how often we get caught up in the what's, and we need to move around those to the why behind it. What's your motivation? What's your reasoning? What's your desire? Why do you want to have long hair? Because if we go, back and forth with, well, I got 1 Corinthians 11 on my side, and he said, well, I have Jesus' long hair on my side. You don't want to get back and forth like this necessary. if there's an avenue, an opportunity to minister to the heart. You see how important that is? We ought to always be looking to the matter of the heart and interacting both our own heart first and the hearts of those who are coming to us. And so when your teenage son comes to you and wants to have long hair, okay, then get to the why behind it. Well, son, why do you want to have long hair? All right, makes sense. So here we are, Delilah. Well, we were. Judges chapter 16. Someone read verse 15. Now, don't just read verse 15. If you would for me, if someone would read verses 13 through 16.
Pastor Jim.
Yes, sorry.
How long is long hair?
Shoulder length long.
All right, here's the answer. What is the standard of Delaware Christian School?
Don't you think of the rebellion in the 60s we had in America with the long hair, the British invasion, and all that? You know, when that first...
That was before my time. I'm sorry. Now, I had the long hair. My mom didn't put up with, I mean, she knew when to draw the line of what to fight for and what not to fight for. And so she had 4 sons, right? And my mama always cut my hair. Talk about getting off. I got to remember where we came from. So mama always cut my hair to the point where I started wanting to have long hair. And mama only cut hair one way, short. And so once I decided to have long hair, mama said, you go pay for your own haircut. And because I'm not, she knew to pick her fights and battles and, you know, what to rise on and fall on. And so anyway, I don't know if I want to open that box either. So anyway, so let's move on. This is being recorded anyway, so I don't get too impervious. So what's the standard? You know, I think conscious is pretty important here. But if the guy looks like a girl, then that would, to me, would be an issue. Okay, whether it's hair, makeup, whatever it may be, there ought to be a distinction, right? I think that's the emphasis. But get to the motivation. That's where I'm wanting to go on this. So someone read those verses, Judges 16, 13 through 16. Someone read that. Okay.
Then Delilah said to Samson, until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you might be bound. And he said to her, if you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web, and fasten it tight with a pin, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So while he slept, Delilah took the 7 locks of his head and wove them into the web. And she made them tight with the pin and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he awoke from his sleep and pulled away the pin, the loom, and the web. And she said to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times, and you have not told me where your great strength lies. And when she pressed him hard with her words, day after day, and urged him, his soul was vexed to death.
How can you say you love me if you don't tell me your secrets, right? The secret to his strength, which was in his hair. And so what, and we're going to talk about this next after we finish these ruling desires. We're going to look at something behind the ruling desires. So what would you say, what strategy does she use to get the answer out of him? And there may be multiple strategies here, but what would be your suggestion? The wording, you say you love me, what is that? What tactic is that? Yeah, it's manipulation, is it not? Yeah, manipulate the other person. Okay, so you can see she is seeking to control him, and she wants to know the answer. All right, so she is using this, well, you say, you know, you love me, but, you know, to manipulate the answer. I want to know what's going on here. All right, Daniel 3, and stop me anytime on these examples here. And as I said before, an example like this could spill over to another ruling desire too, but we're kind of settling on one at the moment. Daniel chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar to the 3 friends of Daniel. And this is the statue that Nebuchadnezzar has erected, and he's making everybody bow down to it. So we're Daniel chapter 3, 13 through 15. So here's Nebuchadnezzar, and he gives the command, and these three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're Babylonian names, they are to bow down. And so we know they don't, but what is Nebuchadnezzar trying to do here? Control the outcome, right? He is so he is seeking to have everybody bow down to him. All right, so when the bell tolls, when the music sounds, when what was the salivating for the mice or something like that? What was that thing? Yeah. Not that we're going to go there. So whenever you hear, then you need to bow down, okay? This is what you need to do, so do it. You can very clearly see what Nebuchadnezzar's doing here, okay? All right, any questions about that example? Drop down then to Matthew 2. Here come the wise men, the Magi, and Herod has an interest. It's a deceptive interest, to be sure. Matthew chapter 2, 7 and 8, I'll give a read on that. Matthew 2, then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. And he sent them, these wise men, to Bethlehem and said, go and search diligently for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me that I may come and worship him also. Now, Herod doesn't want to worship him, right? He wants to kill him. Okay? But he is simply manipulating this situation deceptively to find out the information of where this Christ child is so he can put him out of existence, right? Trying to control these wise men so that they will report back to him. Now, the wise men are wiser than that. All right, so you see that situation. Herod's desire to control this situation, okay, and put an end to Jesus. Doesn't happen. Sovereignty of God. God is greater than any man. Mark chapter 8. You gotta love this situation, Mark 8, where Peter has a better plan. Mark chapter 8. In chapter 8 is the beginning. In chapter 8, Jesus, here in this passage, Mark 8, 31 through 33, he tells them of what's going to happen. And then you flip to chapter 9 of Mark, and verse 30 and 31 and 32, he tells them again. And then chapter 10, you flip to Mark 10, and verses, they're all like in the 30s, 32, 33, he tells them a third time. But here's the first time in Mark chapter 1, and these are the things that are going to happen. I'm going to suffer, I'm going to die, and then after 3 days I'm going to rise again. Now, what does Peter do? Verse 32. Go ahead and someone read verse 32.
He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. Get behind me, Satan, he said. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns.
Yeah, Peter had a better plan. This is not how it's going to happen. Okay? And so, that's a strong word, rebuke, isn't it? I mean, does anybody have a different word in their translation, in their Bible version? But it's a stern response back to Jesus himself that this is not going to happen this way. We're going to change that plan up. Okay? See Peter trying to push in a matter of control to switch out the outcome of how this is going to happen, right? Not a difficult one to see on Peter, who tended to speak sometimes a little too quickly. And then the last one is, not the last one. Yeah, the last one we have here, back to Peter, John 21. John 21, verse 21. So this is after the restoration of Peter. He's denied Jesus 3 times, and now he's restored. And then having been restored, not too long after that, verse 20, Peter turns around, he sees John, the disciple that Jesus loved. And, what about him? What about this man? Now, should Peter even have a concern about someone else? No. But Peter needs to know. He wants to know, right? You ever had the desire to just want to know, right? Got to know the answer. Yeah, there is that innate in all of us. So Peter wants to know the outcome of John. Well, how's it going to work out for John? Right? So here are examples of perfection, desire to control others, surroundings, or outcomes. Now, there are a multitude of them in the scripture, so we've only picked out a few of them here. But you're all okay with that? Matt?
A question about the surroundings. And it relates to parenting. Because there's always this challenge in parenting and kind of this between trying to create surroundings for your children that are protective in a sense,
Right.
so that they can grow up without, influences that are going to influence them towards evil.
Right.
But, so you kind of, as you look at parenting models, there are some people who are like, well, my kids I don't want to hold them back from the world, and they need to experience these things, because if they don't, and you're just being too controlling of your kids and trying to. So, I don't know that there is an answer, but any thoughts on how to?
Right, that's a good question. Someone want to react to that, respond to that before I do? So how can you know when maybe you are crossing a line, or maybe being a little too stringent? Well, I would think that when the fear of man becomes greater than the fear of God would be sort of one thing is, okay, so who am I at this moment of not allowing this or putting the restraints on? Do I have a healthy fear of God? Okay, or have circumstances and people garnered my fear? So I would want to ask myself that first. Okay, so as I'm looking out at the city, we raised our kids, we homeschooled our 4 kids, and we went through this, and our first 2 we homeschooled the entire way. They dabbled in the public school, and then our last 2 we took them through 8th grade, and then they went public school the last 4 years or so. And so we kind of walked through that, worked through that ourselves. So we get that. We also had to work through situations that of giving them exposure to, neighborhood kids, and so we felt that to be important evangelistically when they were ready. So other responses to Matt's question are how, I found that probably the better, greater wisdom comes from we who are grandparents now, because when we're parents, we're still trying to figure it out. Maybe we're still trying to figure it out as grandparents, but we can look back and say, oh yeah, it was a little too or a little less. Grandparents weigh in here. How would you respond to Matt, who's coming to you with that question? Or you don't have to be a grandparent.
As far as the controlling the environment, it's important that we allow them to see God giving them the way out, and they can. Because God gives that promise to them as well.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And we are raising them up to make decisions, right? And I've seen the other side of this when we're making too many of their decisions for them, and then they are ill-equipped to make decisions when they reach adulthood. I've seen that, and then they... so we are helping them to come to be responsible humans, responsible adults. I don't think you let your little kids, they're not obviously ready, but yeah, a little more responsibility. It's better that they fail under your roof than that they do outside of your roof, right? And so you're training them up, growing them up, giving them opportunities to stand for their faith, to own their faith, if they actually are in the faith. Perhaps at times we think they're in the faith, they never were in the faith. We have to sort through that also. So yeah, that's a good response too. All right, so then perfection, anything else there? And I would suggest to you that perfection is one that most people to some degree struggle with. And as you've heard me say before, perfection for some, that is their ruling desire. But for many people, perfection is the sub-ruling desire by which they get one of the other ruling desires. So if, for instance, on this next one, and we will make sure we have it the right direction. Look at that. Okay. Okay, I was looking for praise there. Nobody gave it to me. All right, see how that works? So like on this next one, if I can control someone, then potentially I can be recognized by them. So in order to, I gave this example a couple weeks back, if I looked at my spouse and say, you don't really love me, do you? Now, what am I trying to do? I'm kind of trying to control her outcome, her response, so that she'll give me recognition. Oh, you honey buns, I love you more than anybody, right? So the first one, perfection, is the avenue many times by which we get praise or peace or preservation or pleasure or privilege. Okay, so here, let's look up these right here. Proverbs 25, we're going to zip through these a little quicker. Proverbs 25, someone read that when we get to it, when you get to it. I love the observation here, how this is so worded. Somebody read 25:14.
Like clouds and wind without rain, a man is a man who boasts of a gift he does not give.
Isn't that like the weather forecast most of the time? I mean, I'm looking at the weather forecast now because I'm trying to put my grub X down. And your grub X needs to be watered afterwards. And so I'm just tracking them. I'm about a month behind, but I'm just tracking the rain. And you look at the rain. I was going to look at my phone. And it's like, oh, there's supposed to be rain. It was supposed to be this morning a little bit, and it's supposed to be this afternoon. It's like a lot of noise and nothing's happening. I mean, noise by the predictors of the rain. And same thing here. It's like the person who boasts of all that they've done, and yet they're really not doing it. Okay? Emptiness. What are they wanting? Well, probably recognition in this particular thing, but you can make an argument for respect or acceptance from others. It reminds me of the Pharisees, right? Which we come to Matthew chapter 6, who do their deeds. They pray in public. They fast so that everybody knows. They are giving so that everyone sees, so that they can receive their recognition or the observations, the praises of men on this earth. Now, this is Matthew 6. We have a colon going on there, by the way. So Matthew 6, verses 2, 5, and 16. So you see that Pharisees' classic example of the praise of men. Living for the praise of men. And we have to be careful of that too, right? We want to live for the praise of God. Or we want to glorify Him, not be glorified by man. So we need to be so cautious of this. Nothing wrong with being recognized, with being respected, accepted by others, but when we are living for it, when we must have it, when we sin in order to get it, when we manipulate or criticize or are self-righteous or whatever it may be, which we'll look at next time, in order to get this ruling desire, then we know we've crossed that line. It is no longer a good desire, but now it is a desire that's ruling me and I must have it. Okay? And thus, if I don't get it, then look out. Okay? Then I will say things like, well, how come you never recognize me? How come you never take note of anything that I do? How come you don't say I'm such a good, whatever it may be? John 12:43, we won't go there. Here's the passage. They love the praise of men more than the praise of God. Isn't that telling? When we love the praise of men. Now, I've got to tell you, here's Pastoral Confessions 102, but I got to tell you, there are times that when I'm done preaching, I don't mean last Sunday, but having preached for a couple of years, when I'm done preaching, I really do long to hear what my wife says. But how can you tell, help me out, counsel me, how can you tell when Pastor Jim is being ruled by the praise of his wife?
You get angry when she does it.
I get angry if she says nothing. Like, she must not have liked that message. You know, you see how, or what else?
You get defensive.
When you ask.
I get defensive. What's that?
You get defensive when she criticizes.
Absolutely. What do you mean? What do you mean? State with
When
it.
you ask, if you don't even ask, that's fine. If you ask, then
Yeah.
you search.
If I'm asking, I'm back to the fishing. Hey, honey. Right? But what must we remind ourselves of? The audience should always be one, and it's not on this earth. Okay, our audience is always God. Okay, to him be the glory and praise forever. Ananias, Acts chapter 2. Let's turn over there for a moment. Acts chapter 2. A seemingly good thing that they did, right? I mean, what could be so wrong with selling some property and bringing it and giving it to the apostles that they would share the needs for the church? What could be wrong with that? Well, behind the what you do is a why you do it. So here we are, chapter 5. Someone read verses 1 and 2 of Acts.
But a man named Ananias with his wife Sapphira sold a piece of property and kept back some of the price for himself with his wife's full knowledge. And bringing a portion of it, he laid it at the apostles' feet.
And it's not accepted, and he dies. What's the reality here is he gave it under the appearance that he had sold it all, and here was the entire proceeds from the sale of it. Nothing wrong with, obviously, giving to the local church. We don't refuse giving. We encourage it. But when it comes with a motive that is not pleasing to the Lord, it's like, I like what Haggai says, that the motive that we give attaches itself to the gift. So we must make sure that our motive is right, otherwise it impacts the gift that we give. And then in Matthew chapter 5, remember that? This is worth a quick look. So Matthew 5. In Matthew 5, sometimes people have asked, well, if I'm the offended or the offender, who is to take the first step? If you've offended me or I've offended you, who should take the first step? Both, right? In Matthew chapter 5, we know the other side of it in the Matthew chapter 18. Matthew chapter 18 about, hey, if someone is offended, you go to them. Here is in Matthew chapter 5, notice verse 23. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, well, your brother can't have something against you unless you probably did something to him. Leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. And you see how the taintedness of our lives can taint the gift we bring. And so let's have a righteous motive in our giving. And if we don't, let's get that right before we offer up our gift. Okay, makes sense there. So same thing here, back to they were not giving with the right motive. They were presenting themselves inaccurately. And thus were looking for whatever it may be, the praise of men here. Okay, does that make sense, this example here? Okay, last one, Herod. Wow, gets kind of ugly on this one. Acts chapter 12:20. Here are the people, and they are shouting out to Herod, "You're a god, you're a god." It's the voice of a god. And now Herod had an opportunity at that moment to say, no, I am not God. There is only one God. And yet did he? No, because he was living for the praise of men. Okay, bring it on. Talk to me. Tell me. I love this. Pump me up. And how did that end for Herod?
Well,
Yeah, fishermen. What happened?
Eaten by worms.
Yeah, he became fish bait. So he's eaten by worms. Yeah. And that's it. Okay, and next one, let's go. We have peace, a desire to experience conflict-free living or convenience. This I find many times in men, more than women over the years. So we have the 2 Samuel 12. I love this example of how the prophet traps David. Right? Don't you love this? Who's the prophet? Nathan. And he comes and he gives this scenario of this individual who has everything, and yet he takes the one lamb from the neighbor who has, that's all he has. And when the rich man could have taken one from his own. And so David is caught and says, that guy ought to be killed. And Nathan turns around and says, you're the guy. And that's a wise sometimes approach for counseling to help people. You're not being deceptive. You're actually using a technique or an approach that Scripture offers, is that we put a scenario together. Jesus taught parables. And so here is that narrative he puts together, and here is David, who would rather not be bothered with or inconvenienced with anything from his own fold, and just take it from someone else's. Don't bother me on this. Now, again, there could be more going into this with David than just peace. We have Proverbs 29, the rod and reproof give wisdom, but here we have a child left to himself. Now, why would we not discipline children? Do you know how much work it takes? How much repetition it takes? And so it is far easier to just let it go. It's not far more profitable to let it go, but it's far more easier. I'm not going to deal with this again. Or if you do, it's they shout up the stairs, right? You don't want me coming up there. I'm going to count to 3. You know, these people who are counting to 3 and 5 and 10, it's like, what's your motive? But here is a child left to himself, okay? You know, I don't want to be bothered by disciplining this kid, by addressing this kid. And kids are it doesn't take long for kids to see how they can dig in and get their way. So the rod and reproof are there. They give wisdom, but when we don't bring the rod and reproof, then we are letting the child live his own life, live a very undisciplined life generally. But all of it is, the motive behind it may very well be is that I simply just don't want to be inconvenienced or bothered right now. Right? It's late. Jonah, we'll talk about Jonah a lot next week, but Jonah arose to flee Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. I mean, God had a plan for Jonah the prophet. Here's where I want you to go. Jonah didn't want to be bothered. Jonah had a better plan. Jonah's like, I'm going to go the exact opposite direction from where you want me to go. And just a little caveat, when God prepares before God prepares the great fish, Jonah's on the boat. Jonah realizes he's rebellious. And what does Jonah say to the other sailors? What does he say to them about what they should do to him? Now, isn't that like escape? Just throw me, get me out of the situation. I know what I've done. You know, this will be the pathway of least resistance. Just throw me over, and life will be done. It'll be over. Now, just give thought to that. We're gonna really dig down a little bit more next time. Matthew 7, wide is the gate, broad is the way that leads to destruction. There are many who go by it, right? Hey, the path of least resistance. Go with the crowd instead of standing up for what's right. But we don't want to experience this conflict that comes with living for Christ. Now, we should have a testimony that's willing to put our feet down on the foundation of Christ and speak up for Him, but sometimes we just aren't willing to do that because we're driven by this motive of peace. We have the Good Samaritan. Interesting scenario here where we've got how many different individuals pass by?
3.
Okay. And then finally we got the Good Samaritan who doesn't. Okay, and instead of passing by and not being bothered, can I ask you something? Well, as if you have an answer, or a no. Yes, you are. So when you see a person begging for money, that is a toughie. And what is our temptation when we're walking along and someone's sitting there and they have a can out or a sign out? Or if we're driving up to the intersection and there's the individual, they have the sign and they're looking for help, what's our temptation? Ignore them, look down, look around like you don't see them. Fake like, you have something on your phone at the moment or, something fell on your car. Hope he doesn't look at me. Don't make eye contact. Why? We don't want to be inconvenienced. We don't want to be bothered. That was good. Tell that person you don't want to be bothered right now. It's Larry's wife. Well, all right, so you see, now, I'll drop that one. So then we have Luke 11:5. Not quite sure what's underneath there. Do not trouble me, the door is now shut, my children. This is the persistent one that's just knocking and knocking at the door, and it's past hours, and the man is at sleep, and his kids are down sleep. It's like, don't wake me up, don't bother me, it's night's over, I don't want to address this, I don't want to be, And then finally we have John 3 with Nicodemus. Nicodemus is only mentioned in one gospel, it's John. He's mentioned 3 times. He's mentioned in John 3, John 7, and John 17. And the first time he comes to Jesus at night, every time that Nicodemus is mentioned, he's always mentioned with that label, that identification marker, the one who came to Jesus by night. Why does he come to Jesus by night? Say again?
Fear of man.
Fear of man. Yeah, we could almost drop this into the one before it, or likely the one after it that's coming, which is preservation, the fear of man. But this could potentially also be that this is the pathway of least resistance, right? This is the pathway that will cause me not to have to answer more questions than I have to. If I just come at night, nobody will see me, no one will acknowledge me, I won't have to kind of answer, hey, we saw you going to Jesus. All right, so this could fit in several categories, but we're at this moment putting Nicodemus in with peace. Okay? Like I said, it's a big one with men. And then we have preservation, the desire to please people. People pleasers. Due to fear of what they can do, say, or think. We have Gideon. Didn't we already talk about him? So Gideon feared his father's household and the men of the city. All right, instead of fearing God, he fears man. We have Herod that is wreaking havoc on the church, the early church, and as he is taking and apprehending and killing the leaders, he's saying, the Jews, this is pleasing them. I'm going to keep on doing this. All right, this is going to increase my reputation, or this is good. What others think about me is pretty powerful. We have Galatians 1. Paul himself rhetorically says, do I seek to please men? If I still please men, I would not be a servant of Christ. What's Paul saying? My aim is not to please men. If that is, I am just not a servant of Christ. But my aim, my goal is to please the Lord. And then Ephesians 6:6. This is the example, not with eye service as men pleasers. It's that, this thing called, it happens every March. And it circulates around this orange ball and a bracket. And it catches so many people up in following these weekends of games called March Madness. And you see that people are on their screens, on their computers, checking out all the scores. There was a commercial not long ago. I mean, you can even get, I'm not probably telling you something you don't already know, but you can get like a screen changer real quick, right? So it looks like you're working when the boss is coming. And then as soon as he's going, flip back over, I'm told. All right, elders and Pastor Scott, I'm told this. But it's like, hey, the boss is away. We can play, right? Nobody's checking this out. I've often said the real man is the one when no one's around. That's the real you, right? So here is, hey, the boss is around, the teacher's watching, I better be on my best behavior, but as soon as the teacher leaves the room or the boss isn't around, then we do what we want to do, okay? All right, next one is pleasure. This is perhaps the average American. The desire to achieve prosperity, seek comfort, or amass possessions. Here is Proverbs 21. The one who loves pleasure loves wine in oil, but he will not be rich because his love is directed the wrong way. It's directed into the things of this world. What do we know about those? They perish, they pass. Proverbs 23, what's so wrong with wanting to work hard? What's wrong with a good work ethic when the aim, the motive is to just be rich? And so you put off your family, you put off a local church, you put off opportunity to serve because you just work as much as possible so you can be rich, so you can retire early, whatever it may be. Be careful overworking to be rich, to achieve something or amass something. Ecclesiastes 2, whatever my eyes desire, here's Solomon saying, I did not keep them. It was pleasure driven. Luke 8, the parable of the seed and the soils. Here's the seed that's planted on one pretty hard ground. It's choked with cares, riches, and there we go, pleasures of life. The pleasures of life. This is the pursuit of many Americans, right? Living for the weekend, living for the experience, living for retirement, living for summer, whatever it may be. Not wrong with looking forward to the weekend, but when you're living for it, when you're needing it, when I must have it, and then something, how can you know when it's controlled you? When something interrupts it. Oh. And then lovers of pleasure in 2 Timothy rather than lovers of God. 2 Timothy talks about the latter days, the end times. And then James 5, you have lived on the earth in pleasure and luxury. You have fattened your hearts. Okay, it's all about what you can accumulate, what you can amass. It's walking by sight, not by faith. It's filling your lives up. It's the man who built bigger barns, right? Can't have enough, need to have even more. And then the last one is preservation. Privilege, that was preservation. Privilege, the desire to claim entitlement, priority, or position. I've shortened it, it's not on your handout, but to these words, I deserve it. When you're using those words, you're probably being ruled by privilege. I deserve it. I deserve to have a fill in the blank. Now here's Haman and Esther, and if you know this scenario where Haman walks in and the king is wanting to honor Mordecai, and Haman thinks the king is wanting to honor him. And so, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? You know, it's all about me and what I should get, what I deserve. Proverbs 25, do not exalt yourself in the presence of the king. Do not stand in the place of great men. Okay, be careful of exalting yourself. You may be put in your place sooner than later. Matthew 20, grant that these two sons, remember this, where the mama comes and she's like, hey, where are my sons going to be in the kingdom? You know, and you know, is one going to be in your right hand? Can you put one on your left hand? It's like, I want my sons in a place of priority and position. Now, there's nothing wrong. We want our kids to do well in life, right? However, we had better be very careful that we're not living our dreams out in our kids. And, well, I'll just leave it there. You can groan and whatnot. I mean, we have to be ever so careful here. We want what's best for our kids, but what's best for our kids may be some hardships, may be some struggles, may be some lean times. You went through those, and you know how they strengthened your faith, how they grew you, how they brought you to greater dependence on the Lord. My wife and I say to this day that those are the times when we were in seminary. I was in seminary, and we didn't, you know, the proverbial, we didn't have two nickels to rub together. And that was so true. But we forged, our marriage was forged so much deeply and strongly in those early days that, you know, pulling together instead of pulling apart. And then Luke 18, good teacher, what shall I do to inherit life? Again, the guy who has done everything. I've kept all those commandments. I've done it all. What did he ask him to do? Ouch. There's a guy who is ruled by his possessions, right? And outwardly, hey, I'm entitled to these things. Okay, so those are the examples of our ruling desires. Now, questions about those?
I just had a thought on going back to the
Now watch this. That's having progress. All right, go ahead, sorry.
My thought was, it depends on the situation and the motive, but if you're not willing to, because God gave us our spouses for a reason. They are our helper.
Yeah.
But if you're not willing to ask her input in the preparation for the sermon, you probably shouldn't ask her about it now.
Right. Yeah, once again, yeah, they are our helper, but why am I asking for help? Am I wanting them to puff me up? Am I wanting them to say what I want them to say? You know, once again, get back to the why I do what I do, or the why I say what I say. It's just so incredibly liberating and probing of our hearts. All right, I want to whet your appetite for next week by saying this. Now, so to see how rooted these desires are in our heart, we're going to go even deeper into our hearts. We're going to look at, okay, so if what I want is incredibly powerful in my life, then how do I go about using certain strategies to get what I want? So we talked about this under the first one here. There we go. Perfection. That in order to control other surroundings or outcomes, I may use certain tactics to get what I want. If I want to control, so I may try to manipulate the person so that they will do what I want them to do. I may use aggression to intimidate them so that they will do what I want them to do. And so if you look over at Galatians chapter 5, let's look there for a moment as we conclude. Galatians chapter 5, there's this matter of I will either walk in the Spirit or I will walk in the flesh. And these two are opposed to each other, right? They're contrary to one another. Galatians 5, 16, 17, they just kind of combat each other. And if I'm led by the Spirit, then I'm not being led by the flesh. If I'm being led by the flesh, then I'm not being led by the Spirit. And then verse 19 talks about what it looks like to be led by the flesh. Not good things. Contrary to being led by the flesh, verse 22, or when I'm led by the Spirit, here's the fruit of the Spirit. So we're going to begin to plug away at some of the strategies that we use in our flesh to get our ruling desire. So once again, for perfection, it could be something like manipulation or aggression. If we skip down to, well, let's go to the next one here. With praise, in order to get recognized by others, I may compromise so I can be accepted by others. So I'm going to compromise my belief system. I may use self-pity. Oh, you don't really like me, do you? You said I do it. Peace, I may... Jonah's a classic example, but in order to get what I want, I may avoid certain people, avoid certain situations. I may try to escape from difficulty for preservation of pleasing people. I may, in order to, for the fear of what they may do, say, or think, I may be compliant, which means on the outside, but not really on the inside. And so I'll do what you want me to do so that I will please you. And then for pleasure, the desire to achieve. Well, anyway, so you kind of get the idea here that behind even the ruling desire are fleshly strategies. So we're going to tackle those next time. And we're going to give you a worksheet. We're going to work through examples, talk about these. So that questions before we close, before we end our time together. So this gets a little more interesting because the heart is quite interesting. And the heart, we know, is a bit deceptive. It's a bit complex. And we're never to trust our heart, right? Is that a dangerous path when someone says, just trust your heart? Well, that can be a bit, wacky and dangerous. So we have to be ever so careful. No, we ought to trust the Word that doesn't change, unlike our hearts that constantly seem to be changing. So be careful of following your heart because there are idols at work and at play there that are ruling you and guiding you and directing you in ways that are contrary to the will of God. All right, so next week we're going to kind of delve into these strategies, look at the how we get what we want. All right, so next week we're getting into the how. We'll eventually get to the who. Let's go ahead and pray. Lord, thank you. Thank you for examples that permeate the scriptures, that help us to see that behind our actions and words and even our thoughts, our motives, our affections, our desires, and that we might be clued into that we might be aware, acknowledge that there are idols at play in our hearts. And then until we address those idols, we really haven't gone deep enough. So help us to be a people who are probing and examining our lives, who are asking good, deep questions, first to the one we see in the mirror, and then as we seek to come alongside and help others. Help us to be examining those deep, deep affections of our heart, we pray. In your Son's name, amen.